have a big crisis in our schools right now. And for once, we're not talking about students.
Teachers are feeling fragile. Teachers are feeling exhausted.
We've already have lost over 3,000 substitute teachers since the pandemic began.
So how did things get this bad for our teachers?
Somebody who, when you go to work, you feel undervalued, you feel diminished, you feel demeaned, you feel like you're treated less than.
Plus, a homeless man died this weekend after a driver on I-205 hit his tent. We talk with our crew on the ground about the heartbreak they're seeing. Plus, we all see the camps lining Portland's freeways. Who's responsible for clearing those? A hint, it's not ODOT.
Stories of Indigenous children stolen from their families.
Later, a viewer's powerful response to our story on Indigenous boarding schools. And resurrecting another chapter of Oregon's history, a property once owned by the Rajneeshis, is up for sale. Here's the story. Ooh, what a Monday. Hey guys, I'm Maggie Vespa. Welcome to The Story. Contact info, per usual, is at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to use it. We clearly have a lot to get to, and we want to hear what you think. Some of our content tonight, as you can probably tell by that open, is pretty heavy. So we do want to start on this Monday with a little bit of levity, a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look. This is what my desk looks like in our newsroom. Cue the music. And this is what the desks of our team here on The Story look like right now. Pure holiday-themed insanity. Like festive, but kind of weird and dark. Like Tim Burton style a little bit. And it's also just frankly a lot. Okay, we know that. As our EP put it, it's kind of like Christmas threw up. The backstory is our newsroom is having a Decorate Your Desk competition, and we frankly lost our minds. So I'm showing you this because at the end of the show, I'm going to ask you a question about your holiday decor. I'm loving this music so much. So in the meantime, just, start thinking about what you have on hand and what you're proud of in your holiday decor arsenal. What you're weirdly proud of, to be exact. It'll all make sense later. In the meantime, I do want to get on record. We regret nothing, okay? Let's get to our big story. So this year, more than ever, districts across Oregon, Washington, and frankly the rest of the country are struggling to fill positions. It's a problem across the board, from teachers to office staff, everyone. And their frustration is spilling over. We just got this video into our newsroom. These are teachers demonstrating today outside of George Middle School and Roosevelt High School in Portland, trying to bring attention to how these issues are impacting students.
When we don't have staff to support us and we don't have staff in the building, like Friday we had 15 teachers out, then what happens is it's hard to manage all of the things that are happening with the kids and all of their needs.
Now, obviously, the pandemic plays a role here, but it's not the only reason for the staffing shortage and, frankly, the teacher burnout. Christine Pitawanich looks at how it got this bad.
Staffing shortages at school districts all over are putting a strain on teachers and forcing districts to pay up big time in hiring incentives. For those of us outside of the education world, those new incentives may make it seem like the situation came out of the blue this school year. But those working in education tell me the issue has been building for some time.
Well, I'll just say this. Teachers are feeling fragile. Teachers are feeling exhausted.
We've already have lost over 3,000 substitute teachers since the pandemic began.
And now here we are faced with those needs being even greater than before, and we have an incredible staffing shortage. And that staffing shortage is not allowing us to be able to put in place the staffing that our students need.
So how did we get here? We've heard many times that the pandemic exacerbated the staffing shortage, but we're learning it's a result of more than the pandemic.
I'm Dr. Anthony Rosilos. I'm the current Executive Director of the Teacher Standards Practices Commission here in Oregon. We are responsible at TSBC for the standards for licensing of all the K-12 educators in the state.
Rosiles says there are multiple factors to consider. About 5 years ago, he started noticing a decline in teachers entering the profession.
It's the stress of the work, school violence, just the increased academic rigor that we expect, which is good for our students. Then on top of that, you add concerns about health.
All those factors making some people question if teaching is the right choice for them. Rosiles says 40 to 50% of teachers leave the profession in 3 to 5 years, and diverse educators leave at an even greater rate.
Teachers deserve higher compensation for the work that they do every single day in and out of the classrooms.
Nicole Butler-Hooten, Oregon's 2021 Teacher of the Year, says these days student needs and expectations of teachers are great.
I think the problem of practice becomes, well, how do we do this job and do it well? So teachers' hours are 8 to 4, but I have never in a day in my life been done at 4 o'clock.
Butler-Hooten believes
work that we do. I still struggle with the compensation that I have received over 16 years of teaching and what that looks like in relationship to the work and what I do on a daily basis.
And she says that's especially true now, with teachers doing more than they were expected to do years ago.
Because now we do hold a lot of social work in that avenue, and we always have, right, counselor and problem solver and meeting the needs of all students, but I feel like more so probably in the last 5 years.
Rosiles says that also holds true with substitute teachers.
Many of our districts haven't looked at substitute teacher pay for many years.
Add to that geographical factors. Some areas in the state just have more access to substitutes than others. Then there's the aging workforce. Some teachers retired early because of the pandemic. Reed Scott Schwalbach with the Oregon Education Association says what happened more than a decade ago also didn't help.
So we lost a whole generation of folks when we were defunding schools and not supporting the folks who were already there in that 2008-2010 period. They all found jobs in other sectors, and they let their license lapse.
The past playing a role in the present, a time that's becoming increasingly difficult for some educators to consider their jobs worth it, despite their love for it.
There's never been a harder time to become a teacher, but I can tell you also there's never been a more impactful and important time to become a teacher.
Okay, KGW's Christine Pinawanich is joining us now. So Christine, you talked about, the build-up to the situation that we're in now, but I mean, districts have had staffing shortages before, right?
Yeah, Maggie, so it's not just teachers and substitute teachers that we're talking about here. In years past, there have been shortages in, say, transportation, so we're talking bus drivers. But I'm also told that there are persistent areas of shortages involving, say, special ed teachers, school counselors, social workers, school psychologists, that sort of thing. So this whole staffing shortage, it definitely isn't something that just happened overnight.
Yeah, definitely. So have you been able to get any sort of impression of what the fix to this problem might be?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right? Because ultimately, if this staffing shortage issue does not get fixed, there will be a trickle-down. Students will inevitably suffer, as will entire education systems. But coming up tomorrow here on The Story, we're going to be looking at some potential long-term fixes and maybe some short-term ones as well that will hopefully help.
All right, Christine Pinawanich, thank you so much for the coverage. Okay, let's turn now to the weekend tragedy, frankly. A homeless man hit and killed as he slept in his tent. This happened early Sunday morning along I-205. His name was Terrence Tomby, and he was 27 years old. The driver, a 20-year-old woman, police say, is charged with DUII and negligent homicide. And our own Pat Doris went out to that scene today. So, Pat, what did you find?
Well, Maggie, a lot of profound sadness among the fellow campers. And also a sense of fear now because they are, as you saw, they're kind of up off the side of the road, and so they sort of feel safe. But now that this has happened, they definitely don't. There's also still a lot of debris on the ground. You see shattered glass and like a headlight and pieces of a rear tail light. And there's also frustration from nearby church leaders who tried to help the homeless, and they worried that it was just a matter of time before something like this happened.
I know everybody needs a place to go, and we've got quite a few unhoused neighbors. But obviously camping alongside of 205 and the off-ramp is just not safe. So it would be fantastic if the city could really move on the safe rest villages they've been talking about.
Those villages, which the city says will provide safe and secure alternatives to campsites, have been delayed several times now. Finally, I do want to point out again that the campsite's not right on the edge of the road. I thought maybe that was the case before I went out there, but it's maybe 20 yards up and off the side. Although sadly, that did not matter at all on Sunday morning.
Yeah, definitely didn't. All right, Pat Doris with that info. Pat, thank you.
Bottom line, a man died this weekend. It's a tragedy, regardless of where he slept. That being said, we think it's important to give you more context on the danger surrounding camps along Portland's freeways. So how did we get here? Homeless camps have been a common sight along local highways for years. In 2016, the conversations around these camps started to change. That summer, then Portland Mayor Charlie Hales declared a state of emergency surrounding homelessness, and the city began clearing camps more regularly. But clearing them from freeways was tricky. That land belongs to the Oregon Department of Transportation, and the city didn't have jurisdiction over it. For a long time, ODOT crews cleared camps themselves. They even started putting boulders on those pieces of land to keep people from setting up camps again. But the agency was blunt. They didn't have the resources or the expertise to keep this up. Enter the Oregon State Legislature. In 2018, lawmakers passed a bill officially giving the city of Portland the power to clear camps from ODOT land within city limits. It took effect immediately and has remained intact since. The city maintains they prioritize clearing camps that are dangerous. Often that translates to camps that have caught fire. But in light of Monday's fatal crash, a city rep noted, quote, working with outreach and service providers, impact reduction crews connect people camping along dangerous freeways with services and information about moving to a safer location, including shelters and transitional housing programs. And that's how we got here.
All right, let's shift now to a viewer comment. This email really grabbed us over the weekend. Veronica wrote, I want to thank you for sharing the story of the Indigenous boarding schools. I myself am Indigenous from Grand Ronde. She continued, I had a very hard time not crying because I never really knew about what happened to many of my ancestors. I hope this story opens up many people's eyes on how the Indigenous people were treated.
Veronica, we're so sorry for what you and your family have been through, and we're so grateful that you're sharing your story with us. It's an honor. A quick recap on the piece that she's referencing. On Friday, we ran a deep dive into Indigenous boarding schools, a movement that started in the late 1800s with the explicit goal, according to the U.S. government at the time, of wiping away the culture of Indigenous tribes. It came from our sister station in Seattle, King 5. And here's an excerpt from that story from reporter Edmundo Aguilar.
People here are remembering the stories of lost loved ones.
Makes me grateful today I'm here compared to all the ones that were taken.
Stories of Indigenous children stolen from their families, forced into government-run boarding schools.
I had that haircut too.
Matilda Sampson, a grandmother and community leader, survived one of those schools. We met her here at Fort Spokane, a former Indigenous boarding school.
Everything was taken from me.
Native boarding schools were created by the U.S. and Canadian governments in the late 1800s. The goal, according to the Department of Interior, forcibly relocating the children to schools where their identities, languages, and beliefs were to be forcibly suppressed.
I wasn't used to wearing uniform clothes and not allowed to talk our language or tell our stories.
There are accounts of physical and psychological abuse at these schools. Matilda, a member of a Canadian tribe called the Adam Lake Band, attended Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia in the early 1970s.
They always said there was children buried behind the school.
And unfortunately, they were right. In fact, mass graves were discovered behind Indigenous boarding schools across North America. As we said, it's a really dark chapter in America's history, but for generations, those schools were common across the continent, including here in the Portland area. So to watch Friday night's show, head to our YouTube page. In the meantime, though, we do want to end with one more thought from Veronica. She sent us this photo of herself, and she wrote, I'm proud to be an Indigenous woman from the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. Veronica, once again, thank you.
These days, the city of Antelope, Oregon is a little sleepier than it was in the 80s. But there are still remnants of the Rajneeshis around town, including a building that's now up for auction.
They apparently bought it and used it as their printing house and as an office space. And I guess they had a pretty wide distribution.
When the story continues.
Welcome back. Keep sending in your questions and your comments to thestory@kgw.com or use that hashtag #thestoryKGW on Twitter. For now, we want to talk about a famous and famously bizarre chapter in Oregon's history, resurrecting itself in Antelope, Oregon, as we speak. A historic building used by the Rajneeshis when they took over that central Oregon town is up for auction. And specifically, it's where the cult printed their newspaper. And that building could be yours if you have enough cash. Here's Christelle Kumwe.
Today, not many live in the town of Antelope.
I think it's somewhere between 40 to 50 people. It's pretty much a ghost town.
A different scene from the 80s. The first Rajneeshis arrived in Central Oregon in 1981. The group bought a cattle ranch near the tiny town of Antelope and started setting up what would become a settlement of thousands of people.
It was 64,000 acres, big place, and they started moving their people in for this, following the Bhagwan, who was a spiritual leader.
The commune first took over the town of Antelope, then tried to take over the Wasco County government, along the way poisoning more than 700 people with salmonella in salad bars. It all ended when the Bhagwan was arrested and deported. Several others went to prison. The people left, but the structures stayed.
The minimum price is $258,500.
And now one of the Rajneeshis' old buildings is on the market.
This was a commercial building. It's zoned commercially, and they apparently bought it and used it as their printing house and as an office space. And I guess they had pretty wide distribution.
Real estate broker John Gill says the 3,000 square feet, two-story building was built in 1898 Current owners bought it in the mid-90s and ran it as a museum.
So anybody who buys the property will get assigned all those Rajneeshi items.
Realty Marketing Northwest is in charge of the auction.
The published reserve price is $258,500. That means that at that number or above, it sells.
So far, about 20 bid packages have gone out to people interested in making a pit stop here in the town of Antelope.
Just kind of a quiet place in a sleepy little town, pretty close to some great outdoor recreation. And so if you're looking for a little quiet time, want to get out of the big city.
There you go. There's the offer. The auction deadline on that property is December 8th at 5 p.m. So get your bid in before then if you're interested. And also it's worth noting the High Desert Museum near Bend will also open a display with the Rajneeshi era items from the building that starts in January and runs through October. So note all that. All right, still ahead, it's looking like a recall against at least one Newburgh School Board member will make it on the ballot. And even if that passes, though, and he is recalled, that doesn't mean he can't be reinstated. Confused? We'll explain when the story continues. Welcome back, guys. So pretty much everyone in Oregon who pays attention to the news, or at least watches this show, has an opinion on what's going on with the Newburgh School Board right now. A lot of people, even outside of our state, have an opinion on it. But right now, it's up to the people in Yamhill County and a few others to decide what happens next. We'll explain. Months after the school board banned Pride and Black Lives Matter symbols from classrooms, months after protests and fiery public comments slamming and in some cases supporting that board's decision, and weeks after the board fired their superintendent who had said he would not enforce the ban, a group is trying to recall 2 Newburgh School Board members. And last week, they took a big step forward in that process. They say they turned in 3,300 signatures, enough to prompt a recall election for Vice Chair Brian Shannon. Shannon was elected last year, and he was the one who first proposed that political symbols ban. We talked with the organizer of the campaign to recall him. His name is Zach Goff.
When I saw how this was affecting the LGBTQ community, I figured I needed to get involved. The more I learned about it, the more I watched the meetings, the more infuriated I was, the more I needed to, the more need I felt to stand up for these students and the BIPOC and LGBTQ community out here. It was despicable the way that they are treating these children. And I think that we all felt the need to stand up for them.
So we want to reiterate, we have reached out multiple times to Brian Shannon for comment. He has not yet responded. We'll let you know if he does. We've also reached out to Dave Brown. He's the chair of the school board. And yes, there is also a recall effort against him. And again, recall organizers told us they turned in 3,300 signatures. Again, though, no response from Brown. Now, we checked with the Yamhill County elections clerk. He told us that actually those organizers only need about 2,547, to be exact, valid signatures to move ahead with the recall. So it seems like they're over the top. The key here is if those signatures are validated. In that case, Shannon will have 5 days to either resign or submit a statement explaining why he should not be recalled. If he chooses not to resign, an election will happen about a month later. We'll let you know if those signatures are verified and if a ballot goes out. Anyone who lives in the boundaries, by the way, of the Newburgh-Dundee School District can vote. That's about 26,000 people in Yamhill and small portions of Washington and Clackamas counties. But in the meantime, here is something interesting that we found out. If anyone on that board is recalled, the rest of the board chooses the replacement. And the elections clerk tells us, yes, theoretically, they could just go ahead and pick the person who was just recalled to be their own replacement. You might call it pulling a Neerman. Former State Representative Mike Neerman, you'll remember, was expelled from the Oregon legislature earlier this year for, there it is, letting in a group of armed people into the closed state capitol. And shortly after his expulsion, Neerman was nominated to replace himself. Now, he was not ultimately successful in that endeavor. Someone else was chosen. The Newburgh School Board, to bring it back, has set a meeting for tomorrow night to discuss their new superintendent. We'll let you know what happens at that meeting. All right, keep sending in your questions and your comments to the story at kgw.com. We're going to finish the show next. Before we go, let's circle back to that weird look behind the scenes that we gave you earlier. Our newsroom is having a holiday desk decorating competition. And it turns out our team on the story is a little, shall we say, competitive. I tweeted this out. You can see it. Our theme for this competition is more is more. And more specifically, we love that it looks weird, like the birds and the glittery branches and the feathers clipped to the top. Like, it's all beautifully weird. What is that? It's weird, right? Just like Portland. So that got us thinking, what is the weirdest holiday decoration that you have? Like, what's that one kind of creepy nutcracker or like that old sort of slightly demonic looking Santa that you love, but maybe you have to explain to your guests when they come over, you know? Every family's got them, and we want to see them. So send them in. Email thestory@kgw.com or tweet at us with the hashtag #TheStoryKGW. Scare the rest of us. We love it. We'll feature it on the show throughout the week. All right, in the meantime, pick up your phone, follow us on Twitter, and again, that email one more time, thestory@kgw.com. That does it for this show. The news at 6:30 starts now.
This